Welcome back, everybody. The journey to the top continues. We are here with Simon from OSD. Today, we're talking about some OSD Black. Is that like Black Label? Like, is that like whiskey? What do we?
Yes, it's whatever you want it to be. And I do have the black T-shirt on just to kind of
Nice.
keep in the
What's
theme.
going on, Simon?
Good to see you, man.
Having a great day. I did notice you called me Simon Speakers on the seminar introduction notes, as opposed to Simon Spears.
That's funny.
But we are talking about speakers, so I think it's appropriate.
Good deal. Always good to have you back, Simon.
Yeah, I'm amazed you allow me back. It's brave on your part. And, hopefully,
hey, we're risk takers.
That's right.
Yeah. I think you are, and hopefully I'm going to take things out a little bit in different directions this time, and kind of circle back and try to answer the main question that I've been asked to talk about. But of course, I never approach things directly, and I always start with a 30,000-foot view, and then try to figure out what the path is from 30,000 feet down to a more granular level, in order to help people navigate their way through the process of either upgrading their home theater system or designing and starting one from scratch, which gives you more flexibility, obviously. So I mean, it sounds like we've started. So thank you.
Yeah. Whatever.
Absolutely,
should I put let's put the presentation up on screen?
Thanks, and thanks for everybody who's listening in, looking in, for attending and taking a bit of time out. My goal is always to leave you knowing a little bit more than you did before the presentation. So hopefully that's going to be the case this time. Let me know if it's not the case, and I'll make something up that you don't know. But so, home cinema speakers on wall, in wall, on stands, freestanding, in ceiling. What the heck? There's a lot of choices, and some of those choices have been given a bad rap. I think most people think in wall speakers are going to be compromised in some way. So I'll look into that in a little bit more detail. But I think there's some bigger issues to talk about, and I think the first question that anybody has to ask if they're thinking about upgrading their theater, or putting one in, or even if it's not a dedicated theater, if it's a the family room or a media room, what are some of the questions that you need to ask? And right up front, something you need to do is to prioritize. And of course, this is just my perception on everything, and it's always going to be different from anybody else's. But bear with me. Are you prioritizing sound and or the look? Is absolute sound quality the driving factor, or in that space are there going to be other people who live in the home that share that space, for whom the sound perhaps isn't as important as the look? So aesthetics come into the equation, and it is worthwhile just kind of trying to figure out how you prioritize that, because it will lead you and help you start to define what your choices are in terms of the speakers that you're going to be using. And I'm not going to talk about amps or projectors or screens or anything else. Everything that Joe said earlier on the parasound thing was excellent and absolutely true in terms of amplifiers. I'm just going to look at speakers in this instance. So you've got to prioritize. And then you've got to decide what level of surround sound you want. Are you going immersive, which could be up to 34 channels, or standard, I call it now, 5 or 7.1 channels? I'm not going to talk too much about 5 or 7.1, because I think we live in the world of Dolby Atmos now, of DTSX and Aural 3D and full immersive experiences. And certainly most of the films now are being recorded in Dolby Atmos recording studios, and they are putting information in all of those channels. And one of my mantras, and take it or leave it, and with many pinches of salt as you want, the goal should be to replicate what the artist intended, whether that's the sound mixer, the audio guy on the set, or the director of the film may have had a particular atmospheric feel he wanted to create, and he probably used all the tools at his disposal. And one of those tools now is the ability to develop up to 34 channels, independent channels, point sources of sound to create the effect he wants. And it does those guys a disservice if you don't try to replicate that. And certainly you're not getting everything that the movie has to offer. And hopefully most of you guys are pretty serious about what you do, pretty serious about what you listen to and how you approach this particular art form. And if you are, then you have to kind of look to the immersive format for your upgrades or for your theaters. And I know it presents some really unique challenges, and those challenges are what we're really going to talk about and find out how it defines where you're going to end up, what speakers you're going to be using.
By the way, Simon, the boss man Dave is in the chat here. So I'm on my best behavior.
He said today is observation day, and this was like performance,
evaluation
related. Yeah, so it better be good, Simon.
Well, I thought I'd sent him
no pressure at all.
No, I thought I'd sent him the wrong link, so he'd be somewhere else watching some other YouTuber.
That's right.
Clearly figured that out. So we're going to talk about immersive mostly. And what is immersive? And what I'm showing here, and I'll talk through this quite quickly, this comes from Dolby Professional. This isn't what Dolby tell the consumers, the customers who buy Dolby speakers, because what they tell the end users is not what they tell the professionals who have to record
and stuff.
No, not the installers. These are the guys who mix and monitor and record the soundtracks. This is the studio guys. And one thing they say with absolute clarity, I've underlined it, is all of the speakers should be of the same make and model. All of them. And you're going to go, all right, now that's going to create some challenges. But it's necessary in order to avoid, as they say, timbre shift due to unmatched frequency responses. If any of your speakers, including the center channel, is different from the left and right, it's going to sound different. And so what they tell the guys who record this stuff is that they need to start with the same make or model. There are some possible derivations of that. If the same company makes a slightly smaller speaker that has exactly the same timbre, then maybe that's good. But I still doubt that that's even possible. I think as soon as you change the shape, the size, number of drive units, whatever it is, you change something about the sound of the speaker. So in a purist world, if you want to replicate what these guys are doing and they've listened to what Dolby has said, then your home cinema system has to have identical speakers for every channel. So let's think about that. Mm-hmm. What else do you need to do?
Michael has
I need a different house is what I need.
Yeah,
that ain't working.
Well, and that doesn't work for hardly anybody, but it has to be it has to be the goal that we aim at, right? It has to be, the path to perfection has to be there, and the closer you can get to it, the fewer compromises you can make, the closer you're going to get, and the better it's going to sound, and the better the experience, and the closer to the artistic intent you end up. What else does Dolby say to the studios? Bass management, room correction, time frequency correction are essential for mixing and monitoring in a Dolby Atmos content. Essential, not just nice to have. So DSP, really sophisticated DSP to get it right, is fundamental, and the same applies to your home. Probably more so because a lot of studios start off with a pretty nice room, plenty of they designed it correctly. The walls maybe aren't parallel. They've got some acoustic treatment going on. But no matter what, Dolby Pro tell their studios that they need bass management, room correction, etc. So what else do they say? Then they talk a little bit about what bass management has to do and why it's there. And these slides are here because I don't expect you to read through them, but if you're interested enough and you go back and look at this and then read them, it'll help understand just a little bit more. So I'm going to jump over this one. Look, this is a studio. I think it's River Plant Studio.
Yeah, look at that.
These are all ATC monitors. They're not. We don't make studio monitors like this. But this is an interpretation of Dolby's requirements in a studio. Now, there's a lot of sound treatment, obviously, on the walls for diffusion and diffraction. But the speaker arrays, what do you notice about them? I mean, these are huge ceiling speakers.
Yeah.
They're the same as the surrounds, same as the rears. Now they have chosen different fronts with the dual bass mid drivers. And it's interesting they have offset tweeters for the left and right, and they put the tweeters on the inside, which I kind of thought was not the way I would
backwards, right? Yeah. Usually,
usually
they're on the outer ones.
They are, because the sound lobe that's created would then be more in the middle than on the outside if you put the tweeters on the outside. So that's an interesting thing. But I show this because look at the speakers. Look, this is what Dolby tells you, tells the recording studios they need. And if you want to replicate this in your home, it's what you need, right? So
yeah. This is exactly this. I need that picture. Send it to me so I can just be like, look, babe.
Like Sasha, we gotta do this.
This is no. I'm not
Simon
asking for
says.
permission. I'm just saying, look, we're doing this. This is
this is the path I've been shown.
You know, it's funny because in all the Facebook groups and stuff like that, people are like, oh, I had to hide this from the wife. I had to fight. I don't need to do that. But the trade-off is I'm eating healthy.
We know what the trade-off is.
I can't eat any sweets. She controls what I eat. She doesn't control what I spend. She controls what I eat. So there it is. There it is.
That's why you had salad and tilapia earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
In our last home, I was lucky enough to be given a room that was my cave, and I could do anything I wanted. The rest of the house, not a wire showing, not a speaker showing. Absolute control of the aesthetics was hers in every room except for mine. And in mine, I could do whatever I wanted. And boy, did I go to town.
Nice.
If it was in the Dolby Atmos days, I would have figured a way to clutter the ceiling up with some amazing speakers as well. But a little bit more on that later. So here's another studio. It's ATC monitors again, but a pretty similar sort of concept. Big speakers, not in ceiling, not on ceiling. They're kind of off ceiling because they're stand mounted, but they're stand mounted from the ceiling, right?
I mean, how do you get those in the ceiling, really?
Yeah,
like chains.
Cut them
to the rafters,
ceiling, and then stuff them in there.
There's a lot of challenges.
Yeah,
but the route to nirvana is always fraught with challenges. So just as taking a break from that kind of overwhelming notion that how the hell are we ever going to get to the perfect immersive theater with identical speakers throughout. This is a break. So human hearing, bass and infrasonics. I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about this because bass is important, and I know you guys are fascinated about the whole subject, and there's a lot of misnomers or misunderstanding and as to what bass and infrasonics sub bass is, and so I did some research and came up with some facts. Generally accepted standard hearing range for humans is 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Doesn't talk about going below 20 hertz, which I find a bit unusual. And I don't know why they did that, but there must be a reason, which we can try to find out. But here's another thing: the wavelength of a 20 hertz note is 56 feet.
Yeah, that's crazy.
56 feet. I mean, if you don't have a room that's 56 feet long, you're not even going to get one wave in it. So by the time the wave has gone past you, hit the rear wall, is coming back at you, you haven't even got the complete wave. So you're going to start cancelling out part of the same wave in a room that's less than 57 feet. So think about that. Bass presents some tremendous challenges. The next thing is that 16 to 32 hertz, which is the first octave, it's the lower end of the human threshold of hearing. And yet a 32-foot organ pipe will produce 16 hertz. So if human hearing range only goes down to 20, what's the point of having a 32-foot organ pipe? Since that's 16 hertz, you wouldn't be able to hear it. And yet we know if you've had the good fortune to be in a venue where there's an organ with a 32-foot pipe, you can feel it, at least feel it, and usually hear it too. So I think the first one's probably a little bit wrong, but maybe that's where it starts to roll off. And at 16 hertz, there's still some appreciable hearing. 32 to 512, second to fifth octaves, rhythm frequencies, where the lower and the upper bass notes lie. It's probably where kind of a lot of the really interesting stuff is for us. And then as you move up through the 6th and 7th octaves, we talk about human speech intelligibility. But speech, so I'll throw something else out there. The lowest level of human speech for a singer is 80 hertz. So human speech can go from 80 to around 2,000, 1,500. That's our range. There's probably a reason why THX decided that 80 hertz was the typical crossover point to go into a subwoofer. And I think it's because they knew that the human voice couldn't go below 80 hertz. And they wanted to keep the human voice in one speaker so that there was no phase-in issues, no crossover issues. So that's just an observation as to how 80 hertz came about as being the crossover frequency that's the kind of default in most AVRs. And then as you get into the 10th octave, ringing, brilliance, sound of bells, and sibilance, and beyond 16, nebulous sounds, and it goes past human hearing. And we could talk about harmonics, how a harmonic of 8K might be at 16K, it might be another one at 32K, and all of those add up to make the original note as perfect as could be. And so you need speakers and amplifiers and products that can go up above human hearing range and below, just to take care and add the harmonics back in. So I kind of find that's sort of interesting. What else? There are 2 organs in the world that have 64-foot pipes. One of them happens to be in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Who knew? Who knew? And the other one's in Sydney. That's 8 hertz from a 64-foot organ pipe. The wavelength is 140 feet.
Wow.
That's why my neighbors keep complaining.
Because you get down there,
like
right?
five houses down. I think that's.
Well, if your system was underwater and it went down to 8 hertz, you'd be able to do what whales do, and that is communicate over thousands of miles at 10 hertz. It transitions through water more efficiently than it does through air. But
mine kind of look like baby whales. I mean, they're pretty stout.
But here's another interesting thing that probably most people didn't know, and I didn't know. So the wavelength of an 8 hertz note is 140 feet at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. It's 145 feet at 104. So the wavelength changes depending on temperature. And humidity and elevation. So think about this when we're fine tuning using DSP in our home theaters, and we're trying to get those low frequencies absolutely, and there's nulls and dips and peaks based on wavelengths, right? But they move. They move on a humid day or a hot day or a cold day. So you're constantly chasing this null or this peak. It just makes things even more challenging. So I put it up there. So 16 hertz is a 32-foot organ pipe, but also a Bosendorfer Imperial grand piano. So it's not just an organ that does that. 32 hertz is actually the lowest C on a standard 88-key piano. So if your system doesn't go to 32 hertz, you can't even hear a piano completely.
Yeah, you're missing out.
You've got to have at least 32. The double bass, the bassoon, they're all down there. So systems that can't go to 32 means you just aren't hearing everything. Period.
What's plenty over there?
Canto Audio says must have AVR feature 2022 temperature and humidity correction DSP.
Should be a setting, right? You can plug it in, or maybe you have a sensor built into the AVR that tells you what the humidity is and automatically adjusts.
We got some funny comments I thought you'd like, Simon. Is Larry Stugel says, what's the lowest frequency a turtle speaker plays though? The frog. I think he's talking about the frog.
The frog's like 110 or that's got a miserable frequency range. You need a subwoofer with that, which hallelujah, good news, we make them. So
there you go. So okay, where were we at? We have to throw you off. I told you we're going to throw you off a little bit once in a while.
Oh, good. We got to 64 hertz where we get bass saxophones, cellos, and so more and more instruments come in, more and more things. The human voice, 80 to 1.1 kilohertz. Interestingly, professional digital recording studio mixing console specifications only give you the specifications from 20 to 20K. And I don't know where this comes from, but it goes back to that first point, the human hearing range. Maybe it goes back in time. They thought, well, there's no point in putting specifications out there below 20 or above 20 because that's only as far as people can hear. I don't know. But I was trying to figure out, you know, these studios that are trying to record. Here's a piece of trivia for you.
There you go. This is the lowest C. 32 hertz, right?
That's it. Can you hear that? So here's a bit of trivia for you, which kind of talks to what we're talking about here. So you all know about the THX WOW disc, right? The laser disc that came out with THX systems, and there was a clip on the WOW disc. One of the first clips was Indiana Jones, and there was a sequence on board a boat where the waves were crashing and they were fighting, and the part of the reason why it was a great demo was because the sound was phenomenal as the waves crashed against the boat. And when I was talking to I managed to visit Skywalker Ranch a couple of times, and I was talking to the Foley guys and saying, you know, what was in how did you do that? Because it was all done in a studio and they didn't have an ocean to play with. And they said, well, the deepest part of that is a tiger roaring. A tiger roaring sound was built into the sound of a wave crashing, and it's because a tiger's lowest frequency when it roars is 18 hertz. Who knew? I didn't know.
Simon knows now, though. And now we know.
Well, as I said, at the end of this thing, you're all going to know something you didn't know before. It may not be very useful.
No, this is awesome.
And during the times we can't get out and hang with our friends like we used to, it might be something you have to save for the days when we're all opened up again and we can go talk. And then, because everybody knows, everybody listening here is a bit of an expert, right? And we probably all have friends and neighbors that regard us as the audio guy, and they ask us all the questions. And it's good to have some kind of silly things to be able to say to keep people entertained at parties and so on. So the tiger roar in Indiana Jones, blah blah blah. And
so I find the 80 hertz thing kind of interesting. So you think that's the main thing was to keep the voices on the speakers, not because that's the transition frequency, or you know where it becomes omnidirectional, where bass becomes omnidirectional?
No, I think it becomes omnidirectional above that. I think you got to go up to 110, 120.
120. Okay.
Yeah. No,
All
I think they did it probably because of the vocal range and vocal being so important on film and TV, and also what are we most familiar with listening to? It's the human voice. So we can tell if something's going wrong with the human voice being replayed. And if it's going through some crossover with some phasing issues, we would probably notice that far more than anything else. And most of us don't hear a piano every day. We don't hear waves crashing every day, but we do hear the human voice pretty much every day. And so I think they did it for those reasons, but I could be wrong. It's just conjecture on my part.
Interesting.
Yeah, maybe someone knows out there and can tell us why 80 hertz was chosen. Be interesting to know the truth rather than just me making it up as I always do.
Because that's kind of my default when I'm not sure if I'm setting a crossover on something. I'm like, well, default 80.
Yeah. So why is that? All right. So to recap, to select the right speakers for your home cinema, decide if it's looks or sound or a combination of the two that you want. This doesn't mean compromise. It just dictates to you the choices of speaker types that are available or directs you to them. And then you've got to choose between 5, 7.1 and immersive. And as I said, we're going to talk about immersive. So for me, what's the perfect setup? I already alluded to it earlier on. So if you're starting with a blank canvas, empty room, nothing in it, then 11 identical speakers and 3 subwoofers. I know Joe said 2, and better if you go to 4. I like 3. I'd like to put 2 at the front, 1 at the back, 1 in a corner, 1 halfway across the room, and 1 at the back, probably center, slightly off center at the back, as a starting point. And honestly, it's probably not going to be that way by the time you finished. Measuring and moving them around and finding out where the nulls and peaks are, you're going to be doing a lot of work and to get them in the right position acoustically, physically, before you get the perfect response that you're looking for. So I'm saying 11 identical speakers for why 11? And yeah, I think a good compromise doesn't have to be 34. A good compromise is having a traditional 7.1 setup with 4 height speakers, and place 2 of the height speakers in front of the listening position and 2 behind. And that way, if they've done a pan using the height speakers, you get the benefit of the pan more consistently. So that's why I go to 11. And a lot of the better AV receivers now embrace 11 at least, and some go 13. But I think 11 is probably the right way to go for a decent home theater.
A decent, remember back when 5.1 was decent? It was like,
well,
so now we're going 11's decent, but it's awesome, man.
Yeah, all of us are enthusiasts. All of us are enthusiasts. We're not.
Yeah.
We reduce the compromises to the bare minimum in pursuit of perfection. So where should they be positioned? Front, left, and right, plus all the surrounds have the speakers at ear level. And the center should be as close as possible to ear level. We were always challenged with the flat screens, and the speaker's got to go above or below. Just get it as close to ear level as you can. You could put 2, one above, one up, and one below, and then blend them. Should yield you a more central vocal position, but there could be some phasing issues, so it's not a guarantee.
I think one little caveat, if I can jump in there, is if you do have to mount it above or below your TV, just make sure you angle that down towards your listening area or up towards your listening area. For a long time, I didn't know that. I had it mounted above it was like on a high entertainment center. So the center channel was maybe 3 feet above my head, and all the sound was like just going over my head, because that's very directional. And so, angling that at your listening position is definitely something that will drastically improve your center channel if you have to mount it, a lot lower or a lot higher.
Yeah, and there's another reason for doing that, which I'm going to get into in quite a bit of depth and detail here. And it just doesn't apply to the center channel, although that's a key one. And so we talk about the left and right surround should be on axis with the primary listening position, so in line with where you're sitting. The surround should be line up with the front lefts and rights, so that's an alignment. And the height channels should be positioned, kind of depends on the seating layout, but you should have some ability to have the height channels in front of the seats and behind. There's no point in having a rear row of seats in a cinema and then the rear height channels are in front of them. It doesn't make sense. So make sure that if you've got 4 height channel speakers, make sure that the rear ones are behind the rear seats and the front ones are in front of the seats, and then line them up with the left and rights and the rear surrounds. So someone just threw a comment up there about why they know 80 hertz was chosen.
So Croson says he believes 80 hertz was chosen because it is well below the directionality perspective of human hearing. So you start to lose direction below 120 hertz, which is what you said earlier.
I said 120 and 80 is way below that. So yeah, okay. That's probably more true than mine. Thank you.
So if you have a really bassy voice, you're like, if you start talking like, where's that coming from? Who is that?
There we go. So anyway, if you have to have identical speakers, and I'm going to pursue this rigorously, if you have to have identical speakers, you've got to start with the immersive height channel speakers, right? Because they're the most challenging. And if they're going to be all identical, you pretty much have to base them on whatever you're going to put in the ceiling, or on the ceiling. Because like in my old system, which this was my right channel.
Right.
These were 3 feet deep, 380 pounds. And if I had an Atmos system and wanted to be a perfectionist, I'd have to put
awesome
4 sets of these on the ceiling.
That'd be awesome. You gotta admit, man, you would impress every one of your friends when they walk in and go, "Holy crap!"
They'd bang their heads on them. They're 3 feet deep. I'd impress them. I'd knock them out.
That's true.
You'd be like, we've got a low bridge, and the ceiling is just made of speakers, so don't be alarmed.
Right. And that would be a truly immersive system. So you can't do that, right? Always or ever. But then do you choose in walls or in ceiling speakers or on ceiling speakers? couple of simple things. If you go in ceiling, and I'll talk about some of the misconceptions about in ceiling speakers next, but if you go in ceiling, you do have to consider the fact that the sound transmission is going to go through to the room above, because you've cut a hole in one side of the wall. So that could be a potential issue, which might be mean you need to go on ceiling. If you go on ceiling, they probably have to be pretty shallow, but there are shallow on ceiling speakers available.
Would maybe a backing box help with that?
It does.
Transmission.
Absolutely. So back boxes are great at reducing noise transmission through to adjoining rooms. And since we're talking about identical speakers throughout, if we go in ceiling, then necessarily we're going to be going in wall. And if we're going in wall, we have to deal with the sound transmission into even more rooms. So, the challenges mount up in pursuit of this perfect system.
Right.
Sorry. There we go.
You talking about ceiling speakers over here? In-wall speakers? What are you talking about over here,
Ladies
Simon?
and gentlemen, it's Fresh Hater Jay.
I know. I got to change my name.
Well, welcome, Fresh Hater. You got a comment to make? No, he's gone. Thank goodness.
He's gonna change his name real quick and pop back in.
All right.
He usually has a different perspective than most of us.
Here we go.
Here he comes.
Wait, in-wall speakers, on-wall speakers. I heard those aren't so good.
Okay. Thank you for that. And let me tell you why they can be just as good, but not always. So it is a misconception. And actually comes up on the next couple of slides. So I'm going to go through this one first. Here are examples of an in-ceiling speaker blown apart to show you that, frankly, it's exactly the same as a speaker that goes in a cabinet. It has the same components. This is a 10-inch three-way in-ceiling speaker that we make, has a really nice large magnet, plays deep, plays well, and there aren't too many compromises. We also have in ceiling speakers like the one on the left, where the cabinet, in this case with our T69s, 4 separate cabinets, all broken up, all individually acoustically lined, very well controlled sound, and it goes in the wall, and the sound transfer between rooms is minimized because of that. And we have an on-wall solution in our S series, which are more like a pro monitor type speaker that we saw in those Dolby mixing studios early on, and we have a range of these that start from below $500 and go up from there. So there are different ways of doing it to achieve this perfect cinema.
Simon, it looks like on that previous speaker on the left, is the tweeter and the mid-range below it, is that sharing the same like cabinet? Inner
yes,
cabinet?
it is. Okay. Yeah. So that is a shared cabinet, and then there's a shared cabinet for the mid-range specifically, and then two bass enclosures.
Okay, gotcha.
This is our T69.
And I like the fact that you've got those enclosed versus just the ones that are just open on the back and use the wall, like your drywall as your...
Right. So let's talk about that. In-ceiling speakers are the least obtrusive, and they can have a back box, or they can be open.
Mm-hmm.
Open back in-ceiling speakers are not necessarily worse than box speakers. When people design, or good designers design an in-ceiling speaker, they know that the space behind the speaker is going to be an open ceiling. So they know there's almost an infinite amount of space back there. And so the crossover is designed that way. And the roll-off on such a speaker is very gradual, very low. It's almost like a sealed enclosure acoustic suspension. But it even starts further up and is more gradual. It's at least like a 12 dB per octave slope, but it'll go down just as deep because it's seeing the space in the ceiling as its acoustical space that it can operate in. And if it's well designed with a good quality tweeter and nice voice coil and former and decent sized magnet and good surround, then there's no reason why it can't perform just as well as a speaker that goes in a box. Box speakers have cabinets. Cabinets resonate. That's a negative. If you walk up to your freestanding box speakers when it's playing and put your hand on it, if you can feel that speaker vibrating even slightly, that's a distortion. Because if something's resonating, it's creating sound. And if it's creating sound and it's coming from the cabinet, it's not coming from the drive units, that's a distortion. Ceiling speakers don't have that. Inherently there's less distortion from the ceiling speaker than there is from a box speaker. So it's not all bad news, but it has to be well designed.
Sure.
Well, my phone's ringing. Let me stop this.
Are you good? That's your boss calling.
Yeah, he said you're done.
He's giving you your grade right now, so you can kind of.
Dave.
He's saying move on, show more pictures of OSD products. Yeah.
Awesome.
So in ceiling, in wall is not necessarily a worse solution. They can be as good, and in some ways they could be better. But so, what are some of the other challenges?
So should I put my boxes out of drywall now, or what?
Should you do what?
All my speaker boxes, make them out of drywall.
No. But drywall itself, if you notice, doesn't resonate very much. Just the nature of the material. It's very dead. You can go up and tap on the wall of one of your house and it'll be very dead sounding, just because the nature of plaster doesn't resonate like wood does. So again, this speaks to in ceiling in walls being potentially less resonant than a box speaker can be. But what are the other disadvantages of an in-ceiling speaker? Normally it's the fact that you've got to place the tweeter in the middle somewhere, and some companies, Tannoy developed the dual concentric cone technology way back, and they placed the tweeter right in the throat of the woofer, right above the pole piece. And Kef have done the same thing with their speakers. A couple of disadvantages is that the voice coil for the tweeter now sits right in between the voice coil for the woofer, so there's some magnetic flux issues to take care of. The other thing is it tends to form a horn. The woofer itself forms a horn, and so you get a bit of horn load in the frequency characteristics. So that's a disadvantage. But the other hand, if you put the tweeter on a bridge, which is what most in-ceiling speakers have, is the tweeter floating on a bridge at the front of the driver. That solves the problem of the interference and the semi-horn loading, but it creates a problem because the upper mid is trying to get past that without diffraction, and of course it's in the way, so that's a downside. But there's an advantage to both of them, and that's what I want to get into next. And it's a little bit of a distraction, but it's really, I think, really, really important. And a bunch of people who have listened to different classes on acoustics will recognize the value of this. Off-axis response. And it goes back, Michael, to you talking about your center channel being too high. Because what you were doing there is you were listening off-axis. Mm-hmm. And when you're off-axis, a couple of things happen. Most speaker designers measure their speakers and fine-tune them using a microphone bang on axis. That's the perfect position to listen to speakers, is on axis to the tweeters and the bass mids. And as you go off axis, just like listening to someone talk and then walking around them until you're behind them, the level goes down and the sound changes somewhat. Well, with tweeters and bass mid-range units, the off-axis response is critical to great sound in rooms. It's true whether it's a stereo pair or 5-point or 7-point, and it becomes even more critical when you're at 11 channels. If the off-axis response isn't good, then all the reflections in your room, which account for more than the direct sound, all of the reflections combined are going to make it sound incoherent, muddied, just unpleasant. It's because I've got some graphs somewhere later on to show you what happens when you go off axis. If the frequency response off axis remains at the same shape, but just at a lower level, then that's pretty good. That's what you expect. As you walk around somebody, the level goes down, but you still recognize their voice. What would happen is if you walked around and the frequency response of their voice changes, which badly designed tweeters and mid-range drive units do. They sound different as you go off axis. The frequency response changes. Not just the amplitude, but the actual response. And so and a lot of that sound's reflected off walls and ceilings and comes back to you, and it's just confusing. It's not audiophile at all. And it's hard enough to get that right with a stereo pair of speakers where you can, tow them in, get them directly pointed at you, try to get the benefit of the direct on-axis response, but you're still getting all the reflections. And if it's a poorly designed tweeter and bass mid combo, that's not a very good speaker, period. And it will never, ever sound great. The best sounding speakers ever made have good off-axis response. And one of the ways you can get better off-axis response, ironically, is with an in-ceiling concentrically mounted tweeter, because there's no phase shift. There's a central point where the sound's coming from. So again, there's some off-axis benefits to going for an in-ceiling speaker.
What?
Does that make sense?
How am I supposed to tell those in?
Well, you don't have to tow them in if their off-axis response is good. A good loudspeaker, honestly, if the off-axis response is good, you don't have to tow them in. Why do you think some speakers, they tell you, point them straight out? That's where they sound the best. That's because their off-axis response is good. You don't have to tow them in. Badly designed speakers, not all of them, but some of the badly designed speakers, they tell you to point them in directly at you because they don't want you to hear the off-axis response because it's not very good.
I'll believe you this time because you have an accent.
I have an accident.
Yeah, British accent.
He has an accent? I didn't notice.
So all these notes, I'm kind of ad-libbing through them, and I'm not really referring to them, but they're there if someone wants to go back and just kind of
Hold
see
up.
if what
I have a question though. I have a quick question. So like everybody's always saying like, you know, if I post speakers on the forums and I show my setup and you know the speakers are too close to the wall, everybody, oh, your speakers are so close to the wall, move them away from the walls. And now you're telling me put them in the walls. What's going on?
It's not the same thing.
What's going on here, Simon?
Not the same thing. Some speakers, the designer has specifically designed their bass response to be better when they're further away from a wall. And I get that. I totally get that. And it's about bass cancellation. You're just trying to get distance away from the wall. But what you've got to remember, if they say come 2 feet off the wall because it's going to make the bass sound better, we've just talked about the frequency, the length of these different frequencies, right? 2 feet is something like, I don't know, I mean, I'll look it up quickly, or someone else can. What's the length of a 2 foot, or what frequency is a 2 foot wavelength? I guarantee it's something in like 1,000 hertz or something, 2,000 hertz. It's not bass. It's not bass. I don't know what's happening when these speakers, they say move them away from the wall because it's going to make the bass sound better. It has nothing to do with the wavelength of bass. I don't know what it's to do with. If they have a port at the back, I get it because the port may be chuffing against the wall.
Back there, yeah.
What does that do with reflections? You know,
what does it do with wall reflection?
You have them in the wall. Is that better or worse for, you know, side reflections and reflections off? I guess you don't have to worry about the back wall.
No, you've taken that out of the equation. You're still going to get reinforcement and reflections off of the side walls and the floor and the ceiling, but you've removed one. A lot of studios have in-wall monitors because they like the fact it's a complete baffle and it's smooth and there's no reflections. There's no cabinet to reflect off the edges of. It's another reason why in-wall speakers can sound better. Than box speakers. We make box speakers and we make in-walls with boxes. We make pretty much everything and they, you know, they can all sound great. I'm just talking about, I'm trying to dismiss some of the misconceptions about in ceiling and in-wall speakers because I think people just generally think they're bad and they're not. I mean, they can be if they're poorly designed, but so can a box speaker if it's poorly designed. So here's a couple of images of what happens with the reflected sound. Direct, pretty straightforward, comes straight at you. Early reflections bounce off all over the place. And then they talk about a thing called late reflections, which I don't even know what that is, but it's a reflection. And if the response of your speakers off axis is poor, Floyd Toole, I think, when he was working with Harman, they come up with a paper that said only 14% of a speaker that's pointing directly at you, only 14% of the sound that's coming directly is relevant. Something like whatever that rest is, 86% of what you hear is reflected. And Amar Bose said that when he invented his 901 Bose 901s, where the drive units were on the back and only one was on the front. He was reflecting 85% of all the sound off walls because he knew that's how you were going to receive it anyway. So there's probably some truth in how much you hear that's reflected versus direct. So all the more reason why the off-axis response has to be good, because if you're getting 86% of what you hear bouncing off walls and that response is poor, of course it's going to sound terrible. It's going to sound terrible in a two-channel system, a stereo system. Imagine how poor it's going to sound. Oh, here we go. 491 hertz is 2 feet. So it's not even bass, right? So I don't understand that. Move them away from the wall because the bass will get better. You've got to move them, I don't know, many more feet than 2. Sorry, I lost my track, but thanks for throwing that up there. Let's look at some off-axis response that was done back in the 90s by Floyd Toole and the team at Harman. These speakers aren't in production anymore, and the companies have moved on to different ways of measuring, so I don't use this as a sort of reference. But Infinity was a Harman brand. Floyd Toole was involved in the design, and he designed it to make sure the off-axis response was good, and the little graphs, and they all, as you can move off-axis, the graph curves look pretty similar. The Polk looked pretty horrible and sounded a bit worse. The Klipsch looked horrible, sounded worse, and the Martin Logans were terrible. And that's, and I'm sorry, I know 2 of you own these speakers.
That's all right. I'm not offended. I'm not offended.
I need to put on some glasses. I'll be right back.
This is 20-year-old speakers that were measured, so I'm sure these guys have got much, much better.
Simon, there is a block button on here for you, buddy.
See, I told you I would end up upsetting you.
No, you're good, man. No, this is good stuff.
We've got 14 minutes and I want to answer some questions. So a conclusion, what a good point to come to a conclusion.
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
So the choice between different speaker formats is largely dependent upon aesthetics and practicalities. What can you get away with? The most important thing is to try and stay with the same speaker for all channels to try. It's not always possible. And if you love your 2-channel system, and most of you have spent years putting it together and making it sound as good as possible, keep it. But then add, an 11-channel system. At least make 9 of the other channels the same.
Well, I thought you were saying add 9 more of those. Your towers.
Well, wouldn't that be perfect? Perfect world, right?
But sometimes,
yeah. So if you can, please do. You're going to be knocked out by a system where every speaker is identical.
Oh, absolutely.
Even if the speakers are small and cheaper and don't have the same performance as a stereo pair as your main stereo speakers, when you put a multi-channel system together with identical speakers, you will be astonished at how good the sound is. And you'll wonder how the heck you ever listen to movies in any other way.
Yeah.
Making me spend money over here, Simon.
No, you know what? What do you mean? Did you just hear what he said? Just get small, cheap speakers.
Yeah.
Go back to your
he's telling us to spend less money, Joe. Come
on.
If you got to have at least 3 subwoofers. You do have to have at least 3, and that includes you, Michael, with only 2.
I hear Bose make some pretty concentric speakers. There's like these little cubes, and you can just put them all over the house.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to show you something in a minute. And
BOSE.
BOSE, and then use DSP to fine-tune a flat response to below 20 hertz.
Yeah.
We talked about that earlier on. If you want to hear a sound of a tiger's roar, you got to get to 18 at least.
Yeah,
it's important. And there's instruments down there. It's not just sound effects, which people think, oh, you don't need below 20 hertz for music. Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Yes, you do. Absolutely.
Luckily, I have 3 Travoces behind me, so.
Good man.
Yeah.
So here you go. Entry-level suggested system, HiFi Summit Special, $999 for 11 speakers and 3 subwoofers.
What is this magic that you're saying here?
Just saying.
He got this conversation to this right here. This is the conclusion, guys.
There it is.
So we'll sell you 3 of our 10-inch powered acoustic 10 subwoofers and 11 of our little Nero mini satellites for $999. And if any of you get the opportunity to do this, I'd love to hear what you think of the end result. I mean, perhaps even don't get rid of your main stereo left and right speakers. Just put these 11 in addition to, and switch over to them when you're watching movies. The consistency, the coherence, will amaze you. Even though these little speakers are not the greatest speakers in the world, I'll confess. But when you put 11 of them together and there's no phase issues and there's no off-axis issues and everything sounds exactly the same. It's the sound, same characteristics, the same timbre that the professional audio guys are getting with their ATC $5,000 monitors per speaker, and 3 subwoofers to get the bass below 20 hertz flat using a bit of DSP. This would amaze you, and it's less than $1,000.
That's awesome.
Damn.
And if you want to substitute in ceiling speakers, identical ones with square grills, if you want for the front to make it look a bit nicer, we can do that for not a lot more than $1,000.
Well, Youthman says timbre is where, and I just, I went from saying timbre to timbre, and now it's timbre.
Timbre.
Yep.
Dang.
He was going to teach you some
That's the
things.
French way of saying it. And I'm a Brit. I don't like the French. So
Yes. You mentioned that before.
I'm going to call it
That's
timbre.
awesome, man. That's a cool setup.
So, quick question: are those speakers, are they a two-way design? Like, I mean, a tweeter
Nope.
and a mid-range, or just
Nope.
a mid-range?
It's a 3-inch full range single drive. No crossover. No, it's so simple. And it's frequency response is just because there's no crossover point, there's no phasing issues with it, and despite the fact that it doesn't look that good as a frequency response, it's totally consistent, no phasing issues, and it will make a remarkable good sound.
Oh man,
And that
Get
costs,
all new
For less than
speakers now.
$1,000.
that costs a whole lot less than that other company. Actual subwoofer versus a bass module.
3. You get 3 subwoofers. Whoa.
Yeah.
Because that's what you need, right? I'm just giving you something that you need for a relatively modest cost.
When I get a new house, Simon, I'm gonna try your in walls.
Good.
And just like we'll see what's up. I know you guys make some nice in wall stuff, so maybe I'll try those everywhere. So I'll do what you're saying right here: 3 subs, all the same speakers, but in walls. And then if I don't like them, I can use regular speakers too, right?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna buy some
And
for you.
if I don't like them, I'm gonna call my friend Jay over to talk with you.
Well, we'll make sure you end up with where you need to be with something that's as good as it can get, and is on that path to audio nirvana, movie reproduction nirvana, perfection. I know that there are compromises that everybody has to make, and I know that everybody can get to where exactly they want to be, but it's important that you keep trying, because that's what we do. And when every time you get an improvement, it puts a smile on your face. And,
one thing
go on.
I was going to say one thing that I like about OSD is you're trying to make hi-fi affordable, and I think it's even great that you said, look, these aren't the best speakers on the market by any means, but you combine all these together, and we can provide at least a great sound for you, and a quality.
I learned this lesson in the 90s when I was working for Harman Consumer in the UK, and home theater was just becoming a thing. People were putting 5.1 systems in, and we did Lexicon and some high-end stuff, but we had some. So I looked at JBL as a brand, and we had these little JBL Control Ones. They were meant for sound reinforcement for restaurants and bars. Didn't have a particularly good frequency response. Weren't noted as an audiophile speaker in any sense whatsoever. But I thought because of the size of them, it would be interesting to put a 5 and a 7 channel system with identical Control Ones. And then we were the REL distributor back then as well, with a REL subwoofer. So we put this little system together that had 5 JBL Control Ones and a little REL subwoofer, and we got it under £1,000. And then we somewhat, fingers crossed, sent it off to a magazine to be reviewed. It won Best Theatre System in the magazine. It was what HiFi was back then, and System of the Year for home theaters. It was this little JBL speaker system that the speakers themselves weren't that good, but holistically as a system, it outperformed everything else they were listening to. And if you know anything about British magazines and what HiFi, if it's bad, they tell you.
Mhm. Oh
they're
yeah.
not- they're not driven by their advertisers.
This
They're
is
not
real.
pulling any punches. They're
No.
going to tell you if it
They'll
sucks.
tell you if it's gnarly, and we expected, it was a little bit tongue in cheek. Our ad was "Honey, I Shrunk the System," because most commercial theaters had JBLs, and so we had this picture of a big JBL theater, and then "Honey, I Shrunk the System" because it was a movie back then, and shrunk it down to this little control one. And I learned the lesson back then, and I'm applying it now to OSD, and we have the perfect speaker to replicate what I learned back then. And we have the subwoofers as well. So,
Which one's your flagship in-wall, Simon?
well, the 10-inch probably is the R103.
How do we get there? We're on the site here.
Well, you'd go to the 10-inch models.
You got reference. You got performance.
There it is.
103.
Top left. That's it. Yeah.
So
So
what
it's a-
size is that? That's a
It's a
Nice.
10-inch,
That's a
10-inch
10-inch.
three-way, 2-inch mid-range, and a 1-inch tweeter. They retail for $300 each, so they're not inexpensive. But
oh wow,
Those-
aluminum dome mid-range. Because I was thinking, when you're looking from a distance, if you don't know, it looks like two tweeters, and that can cause some issues. So it's actually a mid-range and a tweeter.
Yeah. And it's a big hole in the ceiling, but and honestly, if you're going to be crossing over at 80 hertz, you don't need to go to a 10-inch in ceiling. You're okay with a 6 or an 8. Is a three-way better than a two-way? Can be, not
So
always.
that's Life of Bliss. That guy.
Yeah.
What does he have in the ceiling?
Some
Some pretty big speakers.
Top view.
Does he? I know he's about to install some R83s, I think. It's our 8-inch three-ways, but I don't think they're in yet. So, because he's looking at our S series, the ones you're looking at now, and looking at a bunch of those in his system with some R83s and to connect up to that X11 amplifier, which is going to be crazy. But
Chana, if you go to speakers and then go to in-wall and then go to reference, performance, and acoustic, then you'll see some, right there.
those are some of our standard in-wall speakers. And again, you could use those in the ceiling as well as your Atmos channels, height channels. I'm just saying, stay with the same speaker. I mean, don't even go to the, if you're using the LCR, use that one throughout. Just stay as close as you can to identical speakers for every channel.
So do you like the concentric compared, as opposed to a two-way? It's like this?
If it's done well, yes, I do. If it's done poorly, no, I don't.
It's all about the implementation of it. Right?
Yeah, both of those are accepted. I really like the KEF. I forget the model number. They have that little the 50s, the L50s. I really like the KEF L50s. That's got the tweeter buried down there. And I think it works really well. It doesn't play too loud, but it's a great sounding speaker. I like the big tannoys. I mean, when I grew up, what I wanted was tannoy Westminsters. Well, I wanted that speaker so badly. I worked in a store that sold them, and I couldn't afford them. And that had the dual concentric tweeter. Thought it was a great design. Thought it sounded phenomenal.
Simon, where's that long, narrow 5-way driver that you were showing?
Oh, that's a T series. So you're going to find that.
It's not here, is it?
It's in-wall. Go to in-wall and go to their reference, I think.
I don't think we saw it in any of those.
Scroll down. Oh,
this is it. Only 3
in the reference area. Look in one of the other areas. I don't know why that's the case. I can bring them up on another screen pretty quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, there's only 3 per page. This other one only has 2.
I like that line array that they have in the picture there.
I'm gonna move this over here and get my other screen going.
You got yours pulled up now, Simon?
Yeah.
Oh, you go to in-wall signature, Chana. So go to the menu, go to the navigation, go to speakers, in-wall signature, and click on that.
There it is.
But you can also share my screen if you want. I'll show you some close-ups of the insides and the breakouts and so on.
Yeah, you're showing now, Simon.
Okay. Blow this up full.
You were.
Did I press the
Oh,
right
here we
one?
go.
Go ahead.
Hang on, I got to diminish that. Oh, there we go. Okay. So
Simon's got a PowerPoint for everything, man.
so that's one of the images, part of one of the images I showed earlier. Let me go to full screen.
Those look cool.
Why isn't it going to slideshow?
It looks like a.
Anyway, we'll stay in this mode. Yeah, we put a lot of effort, a lot of technology, a lot of construction expertise into these, and we joined this. So there's several models in the range. The T69 is the one you're looking at.
You see the little brackets up there as you screw in the screw. It just kind of swivels out and locks that speaker into your drywall.
Right. Now, your drywall has to be pretty strong.
Yeah, look at that.
These are not light. I mean, I forget what the weight is, but it's a pretty hefty speaker, and so the drywall can easily pull out. So you need to stay close to the studs or reinforce it in some way.
Yeah,
Super cool.
So 11
That
of
looks
those,
great.
huh?
Yeah,
Simon?
11 of those.
Your new house, Joe. 11 of those.
Yeah. Well, if you go 11, why not go to? So here's the whole. Oh, geez, I keep jumping around too much.
I even like that speaker that's the next one down from that. I guess it looks like the LCR at the bottom. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, the LCR is more manageable in terms of size.
Yeah.
And easier to for application purposes. But the one thing, you've got to keep it vertical because you can't move that. If you turn it horizontal, you're going to change the sound, and again, you're moving away from that identical speaker thing. So on all of these, if you use that LCR as the front LCRs and the surrounds and the side surrounds, just orientate them exactly the same way. And then when you go in ceiling, make sure they're orientated in the same way as well. And obviously they can't be vertical, but horizontally lined up in the same way.
Trevor's got a good question. Are the OSD Black in walls and in ceilings timber matched with the monitors?
As much as we can. Yeah, I mean, we adopt a very similar acoustic goal. I know, Jim from Parasound talked about, was it Jim or Joe?
Joe.
Talked about not having a sonic signature, and that's a good thing to have. But when you're designing speakers, you always have some sort of tonal balance in mind, and we try to keep the tonal balance the same throughout our entire range. But when you're going from a 3.5 inch or 3 inch 4-range drive unit to our monitors, that's a bit challenging. But at least we always aim for a similar tonal balance, similar timbre.
And then don't you have ribbon tweeters in the monitors?
We do. We adopted that because we really wanted to get maximum SPL level out of those. And ribbon tweeters allow you to play louder. The other way to do it is with the triple tweeter array, which we applied in the S81s and the S82s, similar to M&K's triple tweeter array.
Yeah.
Using 3 tweeters, you can play louder, and you can get the frequency response crossover point down a little bit. But mainly that was so we could hit 116 to 118 dB SPL levels with those S series when driven with sufficient power.
Those are cool. I'd like to put those all over my house.
Trevor said he's down.
Yeah, we'd love you to as well. Let's make that happen.
Simon said, "Oh yeah, just shoot me an email."
I'd have to get some chains to put them up.
Yeah, or design some serious ceiling hardware to make that happen. That's so. Is there any other questions out there from anybody?
So is the box MDF?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is MDF.
Oh, that's cool. I think your little 11.3 system for $1,000 is pretty awesome. That's a pretty great price.
We're going to have to get one of those to one of you guys, just so you can set it up quickly, temporarily, just to give me feedback on what you think. Be fascinating to hear.
Simon Ripewave Audio says some in-ceiling speakers designs allow for pivoting of the tweeter, and even some of them allow you to move the woofer as well. So, however, with your statement on the on-axis response, he imagines that that's not really as necessary with your speakers, because you kind of said, "Hey, look, a good speaker doesn't have to be on-axis." So, do your in-ceilings provide a pretty good off-axis response?
They do, and because it was necessary for marketing, we actually made all of the tweeters pivot.
Okay.
As well, and we actually have angled in ceiling speakers.
Okay.
It's a fixed angle, just because the market demanded that we have those. But if you design them well, it's not that important to do that. Even the 10-inch three-way, that mid-range tweeter panel pivots as well, so you can actually direct the mid-range and the tweeter directly to the listening position. If you're on axis with all of the speakers, but you struggle, for example, perhaps with the height speakers, because there's maybe some reason why you can't put them directly in line with the LCRs, with the Ls and the Rs, then being able to tilt that slightly so you are on axis, so you're identically positioned to all of the speakers, it's probably a good thing to do.
Yeah, definitely.
Spec Up Tech says.
One last question before we go. So, how about our Canuck friends? How do they get it?
Yeah. No, we're working on Canadian distribution, and it's a little bit challenging for us. So we're looking at various ways in trying to get into the Canadian market. And one might be just duplicate what we do in the States, which is really try to sell direct. And to do that, either we have to work with Amazon, which we're happy to do with and do that with, or we set up our own financial office in Canada so we can set up our own websites and sell direct that way. We are looking into it, and I'm frustrated we can't get all of our products to the Canadians as well as we should.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I think everybody was, definitely enlightened by your presentation, and that, hitting us with a $1,000 11.3 speaker system, pretty compelling. Pretty compelling. I liked it.
You shut that J guy up pretty good too.
There's no reason why people can't get into home theater and immersive audio.
Yeah.
No, and it doesn't have to be super expensive. I mean, I talked a long time about how tough, how hard, how difficult, how challenging it was. But then you present a $9.99 system, which make it happen, and it's not. Over the
Oh, that's great. That's great. All right. So Simon, hang out. We're going to get into the chat. So we're going to close up for an hour, and we'll be back at 4:00 with Tommy from Cherry Amplifier. So for all the attendees, see you in the video chat. For everybody else, we'll see you in about an hour. Again, thank you so much, Simon. And
always a pleasure.
And Dave,
Simon.
Thanks, thank you for that special $1,000 situation. That's pretty awesome.
Crazy, Dave.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, guys. Thanks everybody for listening and watching.
Of course.